In the final lecture on the self under siege, we will discuss the work of Jean Baudrillard, a French social theorist. Actually, that now is a misnomer, since one of Baudrillard's theses is the disappearance of the social. Baudrillard is perhaps the most important theorist that can be characterized as postmodern. And I have spent a lot of time, in fact, in a previous lecture series discussing the postmodern. I'm going to give a very brief characterization of it and then discuss Baudrillard's relationship to it. The self under siege in modernity has always presumed that there was a self to be under siege. But in the view of Baudrillard, society has reached a point at which it has literally been overcome by its technology, and the new and important issues aren't about things like the non-believer or the non-offender, but about the non-person. In the world of Baudrillard, social relations have disappeared between humans because humans have begun to disappear. In fact, Baudrillard thinks that reality itself is in the process of disappearing, the real, what has been learned and understood under the name of the real. All these outrageous things I've just said are worked out in a brilliant series of books which draw a lot of their power from many of the phenomena we see around us. So one way to discuss Baudrillard is to run through some of these phenomena. What Baudrillard is doing is basically to trace the symptoms and tendencies of the trajectory of the postmodern. If we were really in a postmodern society, we wouldn't still be discussing things like the self under siege or the real. They would simply have disappeared. There we would be, in a way, transparently communicating one with another, as in an earlier example when I talked about the stock market crashing due to the computer rationality. Well, if we had really reached the postmodern in its fullest sense, the way Baudrillard uses it, it would be the computers unplugging us and not the reverse. The postmodern is a blurring of the lines between human beings and machines, a blurring of the line between reality and image. It is a society, or I can't even really use that word anymore. It is a world, if you will, a grouping of the world in which reality is simply that which can be simulated, Xeroxed, copied. That is one of his first theses. It's a book called Simulations. It's a very interesting thesis. Baudrillard argues that this process is that one of the central things is the way in which that's changed us fundamentally and has helped to bring our relations as humans to a close. I mean, in a way, Baudrillard sees himself as a post-apocalyptic writer. For Baudrillard, the apocalypse has already occurred. It wasn't religious or anything. It was not atomic bombs. At some point in the development of technology, human beings ceased to be the reason of things, and things took on their own reasons, technological things. Let me describe this concept of simulation just a little bit, though. Baudrillard's definition of the real itself is that which can be simulated, Xeroxed, and copied. So whether you're talking about a human body where you can make a holograph of it, or you're talking about the Bible, which you can Xerox, or whether you're talking about the sexual act, which can be simulated either through, repetitive pornographic films, or in a very near future, it will be able to be simulated with virtual reality, where you'll wear a full body suit and make love to your ego ideal, thus making it pointless to search out all the Freudian implications. You can just pick your ego ideal, punch it into the laser beam program, slip into the virtual reality suit, thus rendering that relation, even that intimate relation, sexual relation, technological, simulatable, reproducible, to infinity. Now, all this sounds wild, crazy, and I don't want it to sound wild and crazy. I want it to sound the way that I think that it really should sound. And that's as though we could place ourselves, and I've used this analogy before, but I will again, as though we could place ourselves in that era right before the atomic energy and television, before we knew all the myriad changes that they would make in the way that we were and the way we interact and so on. Well, we're in a period now where I've already mentioned, and these are the phenomena that Baudrillard examines with the most care. Incredible information overloads, with information moving at incredible speed, and even to the youngest children. I talked about how children used to learn morality from their parents, and now I think that Super Mario Brothers, they spend much more time with Super Mario Brothers and are much more like emotionally involved with Nintendo than they are with their aunts, their uncles, their mothers, and their fathers. I asked one of my children, "Why are you yelling at a machine?" when he began to bang his Nintendo. And he looked at me as though I were a being from another world. And because of that, there is a postmodern trajectory. I am from another world. I'm still, as it were, caught in the modern. He's not. Why not be emotional with a machine? His peers are machine-like. We've already discussed that. I mean, in fact, what he sees on the Nintendo screen is his thrill of the day. That's the most active he's seen any simulated image that day. Now, simulation, this society didn't just come from nowhere, the society of simulations and of spectacles. Baudrillard actually builds his work on a foundation, again, that comes out of the Marxist tradition. Guy Debord wrote a book in the 60s called The Society of the Spectacle. And what it was about how when capitalism reached a certain level of accumulation, commodities began to detach themselves and become images. And citizens who formerly had played roles as political actors began to detach themselves from their own lives and become spectators. So, for example, you could say, well, instead of like going to a family reunion now, we'll just rent, you know, a Steve Martin Father of the Bride movie. It's just as good, and so on, and you meet the same kooky characters that you actually know. Their behavior is all simulatable. Another similar, and this is going to sound cynical, but I don't want it to. I mean, Baudrillard has visited our country, and when he went to Disneyland and Epcot Center and these various parks, he said, well, this is much better than Europe. The food's better than Europe. It's a short walk between France and Germany land. You know, you don't have to go through deal with all those nasty waiters. Everyone's so polite. The simulation has outrun the so-called reality. That concept in Baudrillard he calls the hyper-real. Hyper-reality is more real than real. This is actually sounds, if some of this sounds like advertising slogans, good, because in Baudrillard, the heritage of philosophy and social theory has passed over into advertising and television. So if it sounds superficial, good, because the theory, the world that he looks at has become superficial and banal. If it sounds hokey, like a salesman's pitch, good. The world he describes is the world of Jurassic Park, not of Dante. So that is all evidence on the side of Baudrillard if you follow the argument deep enough and with enough clarity.